An old veteran with nothing but a leather pouch and a set of worn tools stands on a bustling military flight line, ignored by the young, tech-savvy crew around him. They laugh, dismissing him as outdated, a relic of the past. But what they don't know is that this man, Eli Vance, has a secret that could bring their high-tech machines back to life when everything else fails. Can the young crew learn from him before it's too late? Don't miss the incredible moment when Eli's wartime knowledge and experience show these young technicians that sometimes the old ways are the best ways. If you believe true expertise comes from experience, not gadgets, like, share, and subscribe to Endless Stories for more inspiring tales of forgotten heroes and timeless wisdom. It was another typical day at Fort Holloway. The early morning sun cast long shadows over the flight line, while helicopters roared to life, their engines filling the air with a constant hum. The young technicians, all wearing the same crisp uniforms and carrying the latest diagnostic tablets, moved with practiced precision. They checked systems, adjusted rotors, and ran software diagnostics on the fleet of UH-1 Huey helicopters. But standing at the edge of the hangar, far from the busy technicians, was Eli Vance, an elderly man who looked entirely out of place. His olive-green jacket, faded and worn from years of service, hung loosely on his frame. His hair, once dark, had turned white with age, and his hands, though steady, were marked with the scars of a life spent repairing machines in war zones. In contrast to the sleek, modern tools in the hands of the young technicians, Eli carried only a weathered leather pouch filled with old wrenches and screwdrivers. Eli had been called back to the base after many years of retirement. The reason? A problem with one of the helicopters, one that no one had been able to solve. Eli was no stranger to these machines. He had kept them flying during the most dangerous missions in Vietnam, when there were no diagnostics, no advanced tools, just raw ingenuity and the will to survive. But the young crew working on the flight line didn't know him, didn't know his past, and, frankly, they didn't care. As Eli stood silently, watching the busy technicians move around the helicopters, he felt a sense of isolation. The younger generation, focused on their shiny tablets and high-tech diagnostics, didn't seem to notice him at all. Their world revolved around data and screens, their confidence fueled by the tools they carried and the new technology that seemed to solve everything. Kyle, you're on engine diagnostics for the next one. Megan, run the fuel systems check, will you? The lead technician, Kyle Kramer, called out as he waved to his colleagues. Kyle was in his late 20s, eager and confident, having completed his avionics training at the top of his class. He was good with technology and knew it, but when it came to hands-on repairs, he had little experience. Kyle glanced over at Eli, who was still standing at the edge of the tarmac, his leather pouch hanging from his belt. "What's that old man doing here?" Kyle muttered under his breath, loud enough for his colleagues to hear. His words were met with a few chuckles. Megan, one of the other technicians, shot a glance at Eli but didn't say anything. She had grown up with the latest tech, the sleek, shiny diagnostic machines that could pinpoint problems in seconds. The idea of relying on manual tools like the ones Eli had seemed almost absurd to her. "I don't know why they brought him back," Kyle continued. "He's probably just here for show. I mean, come on. Who needs these old tools anymore when we've got everything at our fingertips?" Another technician snickered, and they all went back to their work, shaking their heads at the thought of someone like Eli being called in to fix what they considered simple problems. But Eli didn't seem bothered. He had faced ridicule before. In the jungles of Vietnam, he had been dismissed as a relic, an old mechanic who didn't understand the latest aviation technology. And yet, it was his hands that had kept helicopters flying when no one else could figure out what was wrong. As the technicians busied themselves with the diagnostics, Eli simply stood, observing. He had been brought here for a reason, even if no one knew what that reason was yet. The helicopter that had been causing all the trouble was in front of him, its engine powered down, its rotors still. Eli took a deep breath, the familiar smell of oil and grease filling his lungs. The machine was silent, but it was speaking to him in ways the modern technicians couldn't understand. He knew what the issue was. It wasn't something the diagnostics could find, not something that could be detected by a screen. It was a mechanical problem, a small part that had failed, hidden deep within the engine's wiring. It was something that required the right tools, the right touch, and the right knowledge. And Eli had all of that in abundance. But for now, he simply watched the young crew, their focus entirely on their gadgets. They had no idea what was coming. The day would soon prove that no amount of technology could replace the years of experience Eli brought with him. The air was thick with the buzz of modern technology. Kyle Kramer's fingers danced across his tablet, rapidly scanning the data streaming from the Huey's diagnostic system. To him, it was all a matter of numbers and graphs, clear, precise, and fast. Technology had made his life easy. The problem with this particular helicopter, according to the diagnostic tool, was a vague electrical fault. It was nothing they couldn't fix. Just a quick fix, some rewiring here and there, and they'd be back in business. Kyle adjusted his headset and tapped the tablet with frustration. Okay, maybe it's not as simple as I thought, he muttered, glancing at the old man standing at the far end of the hangar, who hadn't moved since he arrived. He hadn't even spoken to anyone yet. Eli had simply been watching, standing still, as if in deep thought. His weathered face was unreadable, but there was a certain calmness to his presence. A presence the team had been ignoring. "Hey, old man," Kyle called over, trying to get Eli's attention, though the words were tinged with sarcasm. "We've got it covered here. No need for your ancient tools." Megan, who had been inspecting the helicopter's fuel lines, glanced at Kyle, frowning. "Kyle, leave him alone. He's not bothering anyone." Kyle shrugged, walking over to Megan's side. "I mean, what does he even know? We've got the most advanced avionics tech at our disposal." Megan didn't respond. She had already heard the tone of the conversation. Kyle was always a little too quick to dismiss the old-school methods. But Megan wasn't so sure. Something about Eli intrigued her. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there was a weight to his silence that made her think he knew something they didn't. Eli was, after all, a veteran of Army aviation, and that kind of experience didn't just disappear. But she kept her thoughts to herself as the team continued to run through the diagnostics. The hours passed, and the helicopter still wouldn't start. The techs ran every check they could think of. Fuel systems? Fine. Ignition? Check. Electrical systems? Green across the board. Yet nothing worked. The machine sat there, silent, refusing to follow the commands of the modern tools. "What's wrong with this damn thing?" Kyle muttered, looking up from his tablet. His frustration was mounting. Everything they had tried had failed. The machine had resisted their best efforts, making them look like amateurs. And worse still, they were starting to realize they had no idea why. It was then that Eli finally moved. He approached the helicopter slowly, his steps measured, and he gave no indication of his intention. The technicians watched him warily. There was something about his calm demeanor that seemed to have an almost mystical quality to it. For a moment, the younger crew couldn't quite decide if it was confidence or arrogance. Kyle watched Eli's every move, his eyes skeptical. "What's he doing now?" Kyle whispered to Megan, though there was a hint of mockery in his voice. Megan shook her head, unsure. "I don't know, but he's been here before. Maybe he knows something we missed." Eli crouched beside the helicopter, his gaze focused on the engine. He didn't check his tablet. He didn't touch anything electronic. He simply stared at the mechanical parts, his fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. Slowly, methodically, he knelt to the side of the engine and reached into his leather pouch. The technicians, though unsure, couldn't help but watch. Eli pulled out a small, old wrench, its surface worn smooth from years of use. He didn't ask anyone for help. He didn't need to. With a small grunt, Eli slid the wrench into place and began working. His hands were steady, moving in a fluid motion that suggested years of practice. "What is he doing?" Kyle asked, his voice suddenly quieter, more intrigued than mocking. Megan, still standing a few feet away, watched with growing curiosity. Eli worked with a rhythm that no modern diagnostic could replicate. He was like a surgeon, but instead of saving lives, he was bringing a machine back to life. For a few moments, no one said anything. The technicians stood frozen, staring at the scene unfolding before them. Kyle, for all his bravado, felt a growing sense of unease. There was no digital screen guiding Eli's actions. No flashing green lights or helpful prompts. This was pure experience. Hands-on knowledge passed down through decades of hard work. Eli's hands moved with a confidence that could only come from years of knowing these machines inside and out. He had once worked on these same helicopters under the most extreme conditions, during battle when lives depended on every second, and when high-tech gadgets weren't an option. The wrench clicked into place, and Eli stepped back, his work done. He didn't need a screen to confirm the fix. He simply gave the helicopter one last look and then turned to the team. Kyle was the first to break the silence. "You fixed it." His voice wavered slightly, disbelief clearly evident. He stepped forward and climbed into the cockpit. Megan stood next to him, her eyes narrowing as Kyle powered up the engine. The crew held their breath, the tension hanging heavy in the air. The helicopter's engine sputtered, then coughed once, twice, and finally roared to life, the familiar hum of the rotors spinning faster and faster. Kyle stepped out of the cockpit, his face pale. How did you do that?" His voice was barely a whisper, as if he couldn't believe it. Eli smiled slightly, his eyes calm but filled with the knowledge of years. "It wasn't the tool that fixed it," Eli said, his voice low and steady. "It was knowing when and where to use it. Machines don't always tell you what's wrong. Sometimes you have to listen to them. You have to feel them." The technicians stood there in stunned silence, their previous mockery forgotten. The machine had come to life, and they all knew it had been Eli's knowledge, not their modern tech, that had made it happen. The young technicians slowly started to realize what Eli had been trying to show them. It wasn't about the gadgets. It wasn't about the new tech. It was about the hands that had fixed these machines, the knowledge that could never be measured by a screen, and the experience that only came with time. The morning had dragged on, the air thick with the hum of engines and the frustration of technicians. Kyle Kramer, whose confidence had been shattered, now stood silently by the helicopter, staring at the diagnostics on his tablet, as though hoping the data would somehow change. But it didn't. Despite running every test, checking every sensor, and verifying every reading, the Huey refused to start. The systems were all in the green, and the data seemed perfect, yet the engine remained dead. It didn't make sense. How could this be? Kyle's hands hovered over the tablet, his fingers twitching with the desire to press the reset button and restart the process. But something told him it wouldn't help this time. The moment when he had been so sure of his tech seemed to slip away. His pride, so firmly anchored in his belief in modern technology, wavered. The other technicians watched him from a distance, but no one spoke. They had all been so certain this was supposed to be easy. Across the tarmac, Eli stood quietly, his presence unassuming but grounded. While the team struggled with their gadgets, Eli's calm was the quiet storm that had been growing inside him for decades. He had worked on these machines in the worst of conditions, in jungles where the only tools available were the ones he carried with him and the knowledge that had been forged through countless hours of experience. He didn't need diagnostics. He needed to feel the machine. He needed to listen to its subtle signs. The team had missed it. They were too busy relying on their shiny tablets and diagnostic screens. They hadn't learned how to listen. "Mr. Vance, I think we've tried everything," Kyle said, his voice hesitant, but still holding on to the remnants of his skepticism. "We've checked the fuel lines, the ignition systems, everything. Nothing's wrong according to the diagnostics. What else could there be?" Eli walked slowly towards the Huey, his steps purposeful. The others stepped aside, unsure of what he was going to do. The moment had come. This was when Eli's expertise would show them what they had missed. Without saying a word, Eli knelt beside the engine, his experienced hands reaching into his worn leather pouch for his tools. They were simple, old, and yet somehow perfect for the job. His hands moved with the kind of surety that could only come from years of working under the harshest conditions. He didn't need a manual, a tablet, or any diagnostic software. Eli had learned long ago that machines didn't always tell you what was wrong. Sometimes you had to know what to look for, what to listen for. "What are you looking for?" Kyle asked, though he wasn't sure he even cared anymore. His confidence was crumbling. Eli didn't answer at first. He simply removed a small panel under the engine, using one of his old tools. There was a certain reverence to his movements. He knew this helicopter as if it were a second skin. He was working with a methodical precision that seemed almost otherworldly in contrast to the frantic beeping of Kyle's tablet. For a moment, everything went quiet. Eli's movements were the only sound as he fiddled with a small component, twisting it slightly, making the smallest of adjustments. Finally, Eli straightened up and stepped back. "It's the bypass valve," he said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of calm certainty. "It was jammed. The systems didn't pick it up because it's mechanical, not digital." Kyle stared at him, blinking, confused. "The bypass valve? But that's not even on the diagnostic screens. How could you even?" Before Kyle could finish his sentence, Eli had already replaced the panel and was standing up. "It's all in the feel," Eli said simply. "Technology tells you what it wants to, but it doesn't tell you the whole story. Sometimes you need to feel what the machine's telling you. The hum, the vibration, the way it reacts when you apply pressure." Kyle was about to respond when he heard the sound of the helicopter engine turning over. His head snapped up, and he saw the rotor blades beginning to spin. The helicopter, which had stubbornly refused to start just moments before, was now coming to life. The rest of the technicians stood frozen, their mouths slightly agape, as the familiar whirring sound filled the air. The Huey, which had been as still and silent as a dead weight just moments ago, was now alive, its engines roaring to life, ready for flight. Kyle's fingers trembled as he climbed into the cockpit. He turned the ignition again, and the machine hummed to life even more strongly. The rotor blades beat through the air in the unmistakable rhythm of a helicopter that was ready to go. His disbelief was palpable, but the reality was undeniable. The helicopter was fixed. "How?" Kyle whispered, stepping back from the cockpit. "How did you know?" Eli simply smiled, his weathered face crinkling at the corners. "It's not about knowing all the details. It's about understanding the machine as a whole." Kyle's face fell. He realized that Eli hadn't just fixed the Huey. He had taught them something deeper. The tech couldn't fix everything. No matter how advanced the gadgets, nothing could replace the deep, intuitive understanding that came from years of experience and time spent in the field. Eli had listened to the machine. He hadn't just fixed a mechanical fault. He had restored its soul. The younger technicians stood silently, processing the revelation. They had been so quick to dismiss the old man, to write him off as outdated. But Eli had shown them that experience was the greatest tool of all. And as the Huey's engine rumbled steadily behind them, it was clear to the crew that they had just learned something invaluable. Technology would only get them so far. But Eli's wisdom, passed down from years of trial and error, would continue to serve them far beyond the limitations of their screens. The technicians were silent, their eyes still locked on the helicopter as it hummed steadily. The engine, which had been stubbornly dead for hours, was now alive and pulsing, its rotors slicing through the air with a familiar, comforting sound. But what filled the hangar wasn't just the sound of a helicopter coming back to life. It was the quiet hum of realization, of a lesson learned the hard way. Kyle Kramer stood frozen, staring at the Huey. His fingers still tingled from the shock of watching Eli fix what his advanced gadgets couldn't. He had been so sure that technology was the answer, that the future was about sleek tablets and diagnostic systems. But in the end, it was Eli's simple, quiet methods that had solved the problem. His knowledge, his hands, and his tools had saved the day. The young technicians had gathered around, some still holding their tablets, unsure of how to react. They had spent hours following the same set of procedures, rerunning the diagnostics, all to no avail. But Eli had done what they couldn't. He had felt the machine, understood its language, and unlocked its secret. Kyle finally took a deep breath, his fingers pressing against his tablet. "How did you do it?" he asked, his voice quieter now, filled with a mixture of disbelief and newfound respect. Eli didn't look up right away. He was busy inspecting the helicopter's rotor blades, making small adjustments, ensuring everything was properly aligned. "I didn't do anything special," I just listened. Listened, Kyle repeated, still not understanding. To what? Eli straightened up slowly and finally turned to face him, his eyes sharp, but patient. A machine talks, Kyle. It doesn't always speak in words or data. It speaks in its sounds, in the way it moves, in the small vibrations you can feel when you touch it. The tech, the gadgets, those are helpful, but they don't tell you everything. Sometimes you have to trust your hands more than your screens. Kyle looked at him, his mind racing. You mean to say that all this time we've been looking at the wrong things? Eli nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Exactly. Technology can give you a lot of answers, but it can't give you everything. There's something deeper at play. It's the way the machine feels. That's the real key. The others in the group were silent, their gazes shifting from Eli to each other. No one had spoken a word about the old tools or the ancient methods Eli had used. But now they were beginning to see that they had made a mistake. Their reliance on technology had blinded them to the most important thing: the value of experience. Megan, one of the quieter technicians, finally spoke. So what you're saying is, we've been relying too much on the tech and not enough on what? The feel? Eli gave her a slow nod. That's right. In the end, it's about understanding the machine, about feeling it with your hands, knowing when something is off just by the way it sounds or moves. You can't get that from a tablet or a screen. Kyle stood still, his tablet now forgotten in his hand. He had spent so much of his career trusting technology to give him the answers, and now he felt like he had missed something vital. He had been so focused on the future that he had ignored the value of the past. So what do we do now? Kyle asked. He was almost afraid of the answer, knowing it would challenge everything he thought he knew. Eli's gaze softened. You don't have to give up the tech. It's a tool just like the rest. But you have to understand when it's not enough. Sometimes, you'll need to go back to basics, use your hands, and trust your instincts. It wasn't a new lesson for Eli. He had learned it the hard way, on battlefields where every second counted, and where technology wasn't always available to help. But in this hangar, with a team of young technicians who had grown up in the age of diagnostics and gadgets, it was a lesson that needed to be passed down. As the technicians stood in silence, still processing Eli's words, the sound of a military vehicle pulling up outside the hangar cut through the quiet. The general's black SUV came to a screeching halt, and the door opened to reveal General Michelson. He was a tall man, his presence commanding the attention of everyone around. The technicians straightened up, instinctively moving to greet him. But the general's eyes were already on Eli, who stood at the center of the group, his hands resting easily by his side. Eli, the general called out, his voice steady. I see you've worked your magic once again. The team exchanged puzzled glances. The general's familiarity with Eli was clear, but none of them knew the full story. Eli gave a small nod in acknowledgement. Just doing what I can. The general turned to the young technicians, who were now standing in a loose circle around Eli. You've all learned something important today. Eli's not just some old mechanic. He's the reason many of these helicopters are still flying today. You can rely on tech all you want, but when it comes down to it, it's the people who understand the machines that make the difference. The young technicians exchanged looks, their skepticism slowly fading. They had seen Eli work, seen him bring the machine back to life when the tech couldn't. And now, hearing the general's words, they realized how much they still had to learn. Eli wasn't just a relic of the past. He was a bridge between the past and the future, and today, he had shown them all that no amount of modern technology could replace the lessons learned through experience. The hangar was quieter than usual, the clamor of modern technology replaced by a deep sense of reflection. The technicians, once so sure that the latest gadgets and software held all the answers, now moved with a new awareness. They worked with more care, with more respect for the machines they maintained, as if they could feel the weight of Eli's lesson in every movement. The tools they once dismissed were no longer seen as relics. They had become symbols of a time when experience was the most valuable asset in aviation. Eli had left early that day, after the general had come to speak with him. As he walked away from the flight line, his old leather pouch at his side, he knew he had done more than just fix a helicopter. He had left behind a piece of himself, a piece that would continue to influence these young technicians long after he was gone. But Eli wasn't interested in fanfare or gratitude. For him, it was enough to see the shift in their attitudes, the way they began to approach the machines with more humility and respect. Kyle Kramer stood by one of the helicopters, his mind racing. He had never felt so humbled. The cocky confidence he had once held in the tech he relied on had faded. It wasn't that the technology was useless, but it was clear now that it wasn't everything. Eli had taught them all that sometimes the old ways were just as important as the new. The more Kyle thought about it, the more he realized how much he had missed, how many opportunities to truly understand the machine he had let slip by. As he ran his hands over the side of the Huey, he thought back to his earlier thoughts. Experience was irreplaceable. Eli had fixed that helicopter with nothing but knowledge and feel for the machine, something Kyle had never even considered. And yet, he had been dismissive of it, thinking it was outdated, unnecessary. But now, as the sound of the engine whirred steadily beneath his fingers, he understood. A few days later, the crew gathered for a meeting as usual. But today was different. Kyle, Megan, and the other technicians had been working under the newly implemented Legacy Training Program, a new initiative brought forward by Lieutenant Wells in the wake of Eli's visit. The program was designed to blend the old methods with the modern, teaching the technicians how to work with their hands, how to listen to the machines, and how to appreciate the wealth of knowledge that Eli had passed down. Today's meeting was the culmination of those lessons. Wells stood at the front of the room, his hands resting on the table as he addressed the crew. We've had some major changes around here in the past few weeks, and it's all thanks to the lesson Eli Vance gave us. I hope all of you have learned the importance of understanding the machines beyond the tech. Kyle shifted in his seat, feeling the weight of the words. He had learned far more than he'd expected. But today there was something else, something that was about to change everything. Wells looked around the room at the team. We're going to have a special demonstration today. And I'm not just talking about your usual diagnostics. I'm talking about the real deal. Eli is coming back to the base. The room went silent. He's agreed to show us a few things we've missed, things we can't get from manuals or software. He'll be working with us today, teaching us the most important lesson of all, that the past and the future have to work together. The crew sat in stunned silence. Kyle felt a wave of excitement mixed with nervousness. He couldn't help but feel like today was a moment he would remember for the rest of his life. He had already seen the way Eli worked, the way he approached the helicopters. But now he would have the chance to learn directly from him. He felt a deep respect for the old man, something he had never considered before. The day Eli returned to the hangar was different than the first time he had arrived. The crew stood by the helicopters, their eyes focused not on the screens, but on the tools they held in their hands. Today, the tech was secondary. Today, the focus was on the machines and how to truly understand them. Eli entered the hangar, walking with the same steady pace. His old jacket hung loosely on his shoulders, and his leather pouch was still with him, filled with the tools he had carried for decades. He nodded at the technicians, but didn't speak immediately. There was no need for words. They were all here to learn. Kyle walked over to Eli, his face a mixture of respect and determination. "I'm ready to learn, Mr. Vance." His voice was steady, though there was a hint of something else, something deep and humbling. Eli looked at him, his weathered eyes holding a trace of a smile. "Good. Let's get to work." As the team gathered around, Eli began to teach them. He didn't use tablets or screens. Instead, he worked the way he had always worked, by touch, by feel, by listening to the machine. He showed them how to adjust the rotor mast by hand, how to hear when something wasn't right by the sound of the engine. He taught them to trust their instincts, to use their hands and ears as much as they used their eyes. With every move Eli made, Kyle felt like a veil was lifting. He began to understand the machines in a way he never had before. It wasn't about the gadgets, it was about the soul of the machine. The parts, the pieces, they all worked together, but only when you understood how to make them work. And Eli Vance, the veteran who had been dismissed as outdated, was the one who showed them how. By the end of the day, As the crew stood watching the Huey lift off the tarmac, it wasn't just the roar of the helicopter's engine that filled the air. It was the silent recognition among the young technicians that experience had made all the difference. They had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that you could never replace the wisdom of the past, no matter how advanced the future became. The sun had begun to set over Fort Holloway, casting long, stretching shadows over the now silent flight line. The hum of engines had died down, and the technicians had gathered around, huddled near the hangar. Eli Vance, who had been quietly working with them all day, had given them more than just hands-on knowledge. He had given them a lesson in humility, in respect for the machines they worked with, and in the value of experience over technology. Kyle stood apart from the group, his hands shoved into his coveralls, staring at the Huey that had been the focus of so much attention. It was running smoothly now, its rotor blades spinning with a steady rhythm. The diagnostic screens that had once filled the techs with confidence were no longer a source of pride for him. Instead, Kyle found himself feeling something different, something deeper. Respect. Respect for the helicopter, respect for Eli, and respect for the knowledge that could only come from someone who had lived through the worst of it. As the sun dipped lower, Eli stood near the helicopter, his hands resting gently on the tail rotor, looking up at the sky. He was quiet, as always, not seeking recognition, not looking for praise. The technicians had learned, over the course of the day, that Eli wasn't a relic from the past. He wasn't an old man holding on to outdated tools. He was a living piece of history, a man who had seen the world change and had kept the machines in the air no matter what. "Mr. Vance, Kyle began, but his voice faltered. He didn't know what to say. How could he express the gratitude he felt? How could he explain that he finally understood what Eli had been trying to teach him? Eli turned toward him, his expression softening. "You don't have to say anything, son. You've learned the lesson already. That's enough for me." Kyle nodded, a lump forming in his throat. For the first time in his career, he felt like he truly understood what it meant to be a technician. Not just someone who could fix a machine, but someone who could truly connect with the machine. Someone who could understand its soul. The rest of the crew slowly gathered around, each one of them feeling the same shift inside. They had started the day with doubts, with mockery and skepticism. But now they were standing in awe of Eli, the quiet, steady man who had taught them more in a few hours than they had learned in years. "We've been doing it wrong, haven't we?" Megan, the technician who had been the most skeptical of Eli, spoke up, her voice soft, yet full of conviction. "We've been relying too much on the tech, on the gadgets. But you showed us that it's about the touch, the feel, the sound of the machine." Eli's eyes sparkled, and he smiled, though it was a small, humble smile. "Tech is a tool, Megan. It's helpful, but it's not everything. You have to listen to the machine. You have to feel it in your hands, in your gut. That's where the real understanding lies." Kyle stepped forward, feeling a sense of responsibility that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Vance, you've shown us something we never knew we were missing." He paused, looking at the other technicians. "From now on, we'll learn to balance the tech with the real hands-on work. We'll listen to the machine." The general, who had been quietly watching the exchange from the sidelines, finally stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "You've all learned an important lesson today, and it's a lesson that will stay with you. Eli Vance hasn't just fixed helicopters. He's taught you all something you'll carry with you throughout your careers." The general turned to Eli, giving him a respectful nod. "Thank you, Eli, for more than just the fix today. For everything." Eli once again simply nodded. He wasn't looking for gratitude, but he appreciated the gesture. His job was never about recognition. It was about getting the job done, about keeping people safe, and about passing on the knowledge he had gained through years of experience. The next few weeks saw a shift at Fort Holloway. The legacy training program, which had been introduced in the wake of Eli's lessons, began to take root. The younger technicians spent hours learning how to approach their work from a different perspective. They still used the modern tech, but now, they paired it with the lessons Eli had taught them. Listening to the machines, feeling the vibrations, and trusting their instincts. Eli had gone back into retirement, quietly fading from the spotlight, but his presence remained. The team had changed, and it was because of Eli's quiet wisdom, passed down through years of battle-tested experience. His methods were simple, but they were the backbone of everything they now knew about the machines they worked on. Kyle and Megan stood by the hangar door one afternoon, watching the technicians work with a renewed sense of purpose. "He's left a legacy, hasn't he?" Megan said, her voice thoughtful. Kyle nodded. "Yeah, a legacy that's not about tools or tech or gadgets. It's about understanding. It's about the soul of the machine, and we'll carry that with us." They stood in silence, watching the helicopters take off in the distance. The rotors beat through the air, strong and steady. And as they did, Kyle realized something he had never thought possible. They were all a part of something bigger now, a legacy that would live on, even as the machines continued to evolve. Eli's wisdom had been passed down, not in words, but in actions. And in the quiet moments when the machines roared to life, it would continue to guide them. It was a crisp morning when the last of the helicopters lifted off the tarmac at Fort Holloway, their rotor blades slicing through the sky like the beating heart of the military base. The technicians moved about with a newfound focus, their heads no longer buried in diagnostic screens, but up and open, eyes sharp, aware of the machines they worked on. It was no longer about the tech, it was about the work, the feel, the machine itself. Kyle Kramer, standing by the hangar door, watched the choppers as they ascended. He had never felt this way before, this sense of connection. Something had changed, and it wasn't just his approach to fixing helicopters. It was his understanding of them. He had learned, through Eli's lessons, that machines weren't just tools. They were living, breathing entities that deserved respect. Eli Vance had walked away, quietly, as he always did. His work was done, and he was content to fade back into the shadows. But the lessons he had imparted, the wisdom of years spent in the field, would stay with the young technicians forever. What Eli had shown them wasn't just about fixing a broken helicopter. It was about restoring a bond with the machines they had lost in their rush to embrace new technology. As the last helicopter flew overhead, Kyle turned to Megan, who had been quietly standing beside him, her gaze fixed on the helicopters too. "Do you think he'll ever come back?" he asked. Megan shook her head, her voice soft but filled with understanding. "I think he came back for a reason, Kyle, to teach us what we needed to know. And now it's up to us to carry that forward." Kyle nodded. "Yeah, I think I finally get it now." They were quiet for a moment, watching as the helicopters circled high in the sky, the distant sound of their engines a constant hum. It was a hum they hadn't heard in the same way before. It was the sound of something working in harmony, of something that had been fixed not just with tools, but with understanding. A few weeks later, the base called for a routine meeting. This time, it wasn't about helicopters or technology, it was about something much bigger. Lieutenant Wells, who had been quietly watching the transformation of the crew, called everyone together in the hangar. "We've come a long way in the past month," Wells began, his voice steady and authoritative. "And I want to take a moment to acknowledge the change we've seen in everyone. There's a new energy here, one that blends the best of the old with the best of the new. And that's all thanks to a lesson we were taught, about respect, about humility, and about understanding." Kyle stood a little straighter. He knew where this was going. Eli's lessons had already begun to shape everything they did. It wasn't just about fixing helicopters, it was about understanding the heart of the machine. And now, it seemed that the message had reached everyone on base. Wells paused, letting the words sink in. Then he looked out at the team, his gaze settling on Kyle and Megan, who stood near the front of the group. "We're going to start something new. A training program that blends the legacy of the past with the technology of the future. We'll have Eli's old tools alongside our modern diagnostic systems, and we'll teach every new recruit what he taught us. How to listen to the machine, how to understand it in ways that a screen or a tablet can't show you." The technicians exchanged looks, nodding in agreement. It was clear Eli's legacy would live on. Kyle turned back to Megan, his face serious now. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm actually glad Eli showed up when he did. He taught us all something that we never could have learned from our screens." Megan smiled, her expression softening. It's not about the tech, is it? It's about the hands that know how to use it. Exactly, Kyle said. Eli showed us that, and now it's up to us to carry that forward. We'll be the ones to teach the next generation. As the team gathered around, ready to embrace the new training program, Eli's absence didn't feel like a void. It felt like a presence. He wasn't physically there, but his wisdom was everywhere. It was in every tool they picked up, in every machine they touched. His legacy had become a part of them. Kyle stood with his hand on the helicopter's body, feeling the vibrations, listening to the hum of the engine. For the first time in a long time, he truly understood what it meant to work with the machine. It wasn't just about fixing something. It was about respecting it, about understanding it, about knowing its soul. Eli had been right. The tech was important, but the real magic came when you connected with the machine, when you listened to it in the way only experience could teach you. And that was something that would stay with them always. Eli Vance wasn't just an old veteran with outdated tools. He was a living testament to the value of experience, resilience, and respect. While the young technicians initially mocked him, Eli proved that true expertise comes not from the latest tech, but from a deep understanding and connection with the machines. His quiet wisdom and practical skills taught the team more than they could have ever learned from their modern gadgets. Eli's story isn't just about fixing a helicopter. It's about honoring the past, preserving knowledge, and passing it on to future generations. Through his actions, he showed that experience is irreplaceable and timeless. If Eli's story has inspired you and reminded you of the value of experience, respect, and legacy, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Endless Stories. Join us as we continue to honor the unsung heroes who shaped our world and passed on life-changing lessons. Don't miss out on more incredible stories. Subscribe now and keep the wisdom of the past alive for the future.